Rain hammered the streets, slicking the pavement with silver streaks of light. Emily stepped out of the car, her chest tightening as her eyes locked on the impossible sight before her. James, the man she had trusted with her heart, stood only feet away, his hand intertwined with Claire's. Claire whispered something that made James laugh, and Emily's stomach churned as if the ground beneath her had collapsed. Emily said, "How could you do this?" But her voice was lost under the roar of the storm. James looked at her, eyes wide, his lips parting without words. Claire tightened her grip on his arm, her expression half defiant, half anxious. Emily's body shook, rain soaking through her blouse as tears burned down her face. In that instant, the world she knew shattered, leaving her frozen in betrayal's cruel embrace. Emily stumbled backward, the rain masking her sobs as her breath came in ragged gasps. James shouted, "Wait!" but his voice broke with hesitation. Claire held him tighter, her eyes sharp, daring Emily to move closer. Emily's mind screamed to run, to wake from this nightmare, but her body felt rooted to the wet pavement. The storm echoed her chaos, every lightning strike illuminating the betrayal more vividly. Emily whispered, "Everything I gave, wasted." Her words dissolved in the downpour. James took a step forward, guilt carved into his face, yet his silence spoke louder than excuses. Emily turned, forcing her shaking legs to move, the screech of the storm and the pounding of her heart drowning out all else. Her life, once steady and safe, had collapsed in an instant. Emily slammed her car door, hands trembling on the wheel as the storm rattled the roof. Her chest heaved, lungs aching for air. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, words tumbling out in a broken whisper. How did I not see this? Her phone buzzed beside her, James' name lighting the screen. For a moment, she stared, her reflection warped in the glass. She wanted answers, but she couldn't bear to hear his voice. The phone vibrated again before she silenced it with trembling fingers. Thunder shook the car, mirroring her fury. She gripped the wheel, determination stirring beneath the heartbreak. Emily muttered, "You destroyed everything." Her voice cracked, but the weight of betrayal now burned with a new edge. A spark of strength hidden under the grief. Emily drove aimlessly through the storm, headlights blurring across empty roads. Her breath fogged the glass, and the silence inside the car pressed heavily on her chest. Claire's laughter replayed in her head like a cruel echo. She whispered, "She was my friend." The betrayal cut deeper, not just from James, but from the woman she had trusted for years. Emily's hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles pale as she tried to blink away tears. Every memory of shared dinners, secrets exchanged, and promises made replayed like shards tearing her apart. Lightning flashed, casting her face in fractured light. She said, "I lost them both." The words lingered in the silence, a confession swallowed by the storm outside. Emily pulled over beneath a lone street lamp, the storm easing into a steady drizzle. She stepped out, rain dripping from her hair as she leaned against the car, gasping for air. She whispered, "I gave everything to them." Her voice trembled as the truth clawed its way out. She had sacrificed time, dreams, and pieces of herself, only to be betrayed in the cruelest way. The silence of the empty street weighed on her, broken only by the hum of the lamp above. She wiped her face with trembling hands, her body exhausted but her mind racing. Emily looked up at the gray sky and whispered, "Where do I go from here?" The question floated into the night unanswered, heavy with despair and loneliness. Emily sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the darkened window as dawn crept over the horizon. Her body was still heavy with exhaustion, but her mind refused rest. The storm had passed, yet inside her chest it raged on. She thought of her children asleep down the hall, unaware of the chaos unraveling their world. Emily whispered, "I have to stay strong for them." The weight of betrayal pressed against her shoulders, each memory of James slicing like glass. She clutched the blanket tightly, grounding herself in silence. Every sacrifice she had made for her family played through her head. Dreams put aside, ambitions delayed, love given freely. She whispered again, Why was it never enough? The emptiness of the room answered her, reminding her that strength now was the only thing she could cling to. The kitchen smelled of coffee, but Emily barely touched her cup. Across the table sat her friend Sarah, who leaned forward, worry etched into every feature. Sarah said, "You don't deserve this, Em." Emily stared at the steam curling upward, her voice flat. "Then why does it feel like I do?" The betrayal gnawed at her self-worth, each thought heavier than the last. Sarah reached out, her hand warm against Emily's cold fingers. "You gave him everything," Sarah whispered, "and he still chose to ruin it." Emily's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She said, "I don't even know who I am anymore." The quiet clink of the cup against the saucer was the only sound, a fragile echo in a house that no longer felt like home. Later that day, Emily walked through the small garden behind her house, the damp earth clinging to her shoes. Every flower she had planted with love now seemed to mock her. James had promised her forever here, in this space filled with life. Emily whispered, "Was it all a lie?" Her hand brushed over the petals of a rose, fingers trembling. She remembered James saying, "This is where we'll grow old." The memory pierced like a knife, the sweetness soured by betrayal. She bent down, plucking a wilted leaf, staring at it as though it held answers. Emily said softly, "I gave him everything, and he gave me nothing but pain." The garden, once her sanctuary, now mirrored her fractured soul, beauty standing alongside decay. Emily stood before a mirror, her reflection fractured by the cracks in the glass from an old accident. She studied her face as though searching for the woman she once knew. The betrayal had aged her overnight, or maybe it had simply stripped away illusions. She whispered, "Who am I without him?" Her hand pressed against the cold glass, tears threatening to fall but held back with force. The silence of the room was suffocating, her breaths shallow. Memories of laughter and promises filled her mind like ghosts, each one more unbearable than the last. She remembered James calling her beautiful, but now the words felt hollow. Emily said, "Maybe I was never enough." The reflection stared back, a stranger bound by heartbreak and resilience fighting to rise. That evening, Emily sat on the porch, the fading sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The stillness contrasted with the storm in her heart. Her children's laughter echoed faintly from inside, a reminder of why she could not collapse entirely. She whispered, "I have to keep going for them." A gentle breeze brushed her face, carrying the scent of wet earth. She closed her eyes, imagining a life where betrayal did not exist, where love was not shattered. The fantasy dissolved quickly, leaving only pain. Emily said softly, "But I'm still here." The porch creaked beneath her weight as she leaned back, eyes locked on the horizon. For the first time since the storm, a fragile thread of strength began to weave through her broken spirit. Emily sat at her desk late into the night, the glow of her laptop illuminating her pale face. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through James' messages, every word slicing deeper than the last. She whispered, "How many lies have you told me?" The screen revealed declarations of love, meant for Claire, words he had once spoken to her. Her breath caught, heart pounding in her chest, as denial crumbled into bitter truth. Emily pressed her palm against her mouth, desperate to silence her sobs. The betrayal unfolded before her like a cruel performance, each message mocking the years she had believed in him. She whispered, "I gave you everything, and you gave her your heart." The silence of the room wrapped around her like a suffocating cloak. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard as though typing could erase the pain. Instead, she opened another folder, finding photos. James and Claire together, smiling as if they had no care in the world. Emily's stomach lurched, bile rising in her throat. She slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet house. She whispered, "You were supposed to be mine." Her body trembled with rage and sorrow, caught between the urge to scream and the need to collapse. She staggered to her feet, clutching the edge of the desk for balance. Every image seared into her mind, memories that weren't hers but stolen moments of betrayal. Emily said, "How long has this been happening?" The question hung heavy in the room, unanswered. Emily stormed into the living room, her breath ragged as her phone buzzed again. James' name flashed across the screen, a cruel reminder. She let it ring, her jaw clenched, eyes blazing with fury. She shouted into the empty room, "You don't get to call me now!" The sound of her own voice startled her, raw and filled with broken power. The phone finally silenced, but her anger remained, simmering beneath the grief. She paced the floor, hands tangled in her hair, chest heaving. Emily muttered, "I can't take this anymore." Her legs gave out, and she sank onto the couch, sobs shaking her frame. The betrayal was no longer hidden in shadows. It was real, undeniable, and tearing her apart. The next morning, Emily sat at the kitchen counter, clutching a cup of cold coffee she hadn't touched. The weight of sleepless hours etched lines into her face. Her daughter's laughter drifted from the other room, a reminder of innocence untouched by betrayal. Emily whispered, "I can't let them see me broken." She forced a deep breath, trying to hold herself together. The walls of the house felt like they were closing in, memories painted on every surface. Her eyes burned, but she swallowed the tears. She said, "You will not destroy me, James." The words felt foreign, but for the first time, strength crept into her voice. Her grip on the cup tightened, knuckles pale, as if holding on to the last piece of herself. Emily walked into the attic, dust swirling in the beams of afternoon light. Boxes of old memories surrounded her, the weight of the past pressing in. She opened one and found an album filled with photos of her and James, smiles frozen in time. She whispered, "Was any of it real?" Her fingers traced over his face in the photos, the man she thought she knew. Anger surged, and she slammed the album shut, sending dust scattering. Emily's chest rose and fell in rapid bursts, fury mixing with despair. She muttered, "You built a life of lies." The silence of the attic swallowed her words, leaving her alone with memories that no longer belonged to her. Emily's phone rang as she sat alone in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cold glass of water. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, yet something urged her to answer. A trembling voice said, "Emily, it's your mother." Emily froze, her chest tightening. They hadn't spoken in years, not since anger and distance tore them apart. Her mother's voice cracked as she whispered, "I should have told you the truth long ago." Emily's heart pounded as confusion rippled through her. "What truth?" she asked, her voice sharp. Silence lingered before her mother finally said, "James isn't your first betrayal. Your father wasn't the man you thought he was either." The words sliced deeper than the storm ever could, unraveling decades of certainty in an instant. Emily gripped the phone tighter, her breath shallow. Her mother's words carried a weight that crushed the air from her lungs. "What do you mean?" Emily demanded, her voice trembling between fear and anger. Her mother paused before answering. "Your real father was someone else. I kept it from you to protect you." Emily's knees weakened, and she sank into the chair, her fingers digging into the wooden armrest. Betrayal wasn't just from James, it ran deeper, stretching back to her own bloodline. Emily whispered, "You lied to me my whole life." Tears burned her eyes, but fury pushed them back. Her mother sobbed softly on the other end, saying, "I thought it was for the best." Emily slammed her fist on the table, her world collapsing again. Emily staggered to her bedroom, clutching the phone, her mother's words echoing in her head. She sat on the edge of the bed, whispering, "Who am I if everything was a lie?" Her mother's voice, frail and breaking, said, "Your real father was someone I loved once, but I was too afraid to tell you." Emily pressed her palm to her forehead, her breathing uneven. The betrayal she carried from James now twisted with her mother's revelation, forming a storm that threatened to break her apart. She muttered, "All this time, I was living in illusions." Her hands shook, the phone slipping slightly from her grasp. Her mother whispered, "I'm sorry, Emily. I should have told you sooner." Emily's silence was heavier than words, her spirit fractured. The room spun around her as Emily replayed her mother's words. She saw flashes of her childhood, memories of a man she thought was her father, his laughter, his advice, his love. Were they lies too? Her stomach knotted, fury mixing with heartbreak. She whispered, "Everyone I trusted has broken me." She rose and paced the room, her body trembling with anger. "James betrayed me with Claire. You betrayed me with silence. What's left?" she cried into the phone. Her mother sobbed, but Emily could no longer listen. She pressed the phone against her chest, shaking violently. The air felt thin, her breath shallow, as though the walls themselves were closing in. Betrayal wasn't just present, it was her history, a legacy she never asked for. Emily dropped the phone onto the bed, her hands covering her face. The weight of betrayal crushed her from all sides: husband, friend, mother, and even the man she once called father. She whispered, "I don't even know myself anymore." Her chest heaved, tears finally spilling as her body shook uncontrollably. She collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling as shadows stretched across the room. For the first time, she felt utterly alone, stripped of every truth she had once believed. Her voice cracked as she said, "What else have you hidden from me?" The silence that followed was suffocating, a reminder that no answers could mend the destruction. Her world was no longer just broken. It had been built on lies from the very beginning. Emily stood outside Claire's house, her hands clenched into fists. The evening air was heavy, the glow of the porch light spilling across her face. Her heart pounded, each beat echoing with rage. She whispered, "This ends tonight." She walked up the steps, her shoes scraping against the wood, every step a declaration of strength. Inside, shadows moved behind the curtains, laughter faint but audible. Emily's stomach twisted as she realized James was there too. She pressed the doorbell with trembling fingers, her jaw tight. The door creaked open, revealing Claire's startled face. Emily said coldly, "We need to talk." The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension, as the storm inside Emily threatened to break free. Claire's expression shifted quickly from shock to defiance. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice sharp. Emily stepped inside without permission, her eyes blazing. James stood in the living room, frozen, guilt painted across his face. Emily's voice cut through the silence. "How long have you been lying to me?" James opened his mouth, but no words came. Claire crossed her arms, smirking faintly, as though daring Emily to collapse. Emily's body shook, but her voice grew stronger. "You betrayed me, both of you, and you thought I'd never find out." James lowered his gaze, shame radiating from him. Emily's chest heaved, her rage finally breaking free. "You destroyed everything we built," she cried, her voice echoing through the room. James finally spoke, his voice low. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Emily's eyes filled with fire as she shouted, "It wasn't supposed to happen at all." Claire rolled her eyes, saying, "Maybe you were too blind to see the truth." Emily turned sharply toward her, fury radiating from every breath. "You were my friend," Emily spat, her voice cracking. Claire smirked, but her eyes betrayed unease. James tried to step forward, reaching out as if to calm the storm. Emily pulled back, trembling but unyielding. She said, "Don't touch me, you don't get to comfort me now." The room pulsed with tension, every second heavier than the last, as betrayal stood before her in flesh and blood. Emily's voice grew steadier, her pain transforming into power. "You think you broke me," she said coldly, "but you only revealed who you really are." James' face twisted with regret, his shoulders sagging. Claire stepped back, her smirk faltering, realizing Emily wasn't collapsing. Emily walked closer, her gaze unwavering. "You lied, you cheated, and you both thought I was too weak to fight back." James whispered, "Emily, I never meant to hurt you." She cut him off, her voice sharp as glass. "But you did. Every word, every secret, every kiss you shared was another knife in my back." The silence that followed was thick, leaving James and Claire stripped of excuses. Emily's strength now filled the room. Emily's hands trembled, but her voice carried the weight of finality. "You don't get to define me anymore," she declared. Claire opened her mouth to retort, but James cut her off, whispering, "Emily, please." Emily turned toward him, her eyes full of both pain and clarity. "No," she said firmly, "you don't get to ask me for anything ever again." She stepped back, her chest heaving as silence engulfed the room. James collapsed into the chair, face buried in his hands. Claire stood rigid, for once without words. Emily turned toward the door, her shoulders heavy, but her spirit unbroken. As she walked out, she whispered to herself, "This chapter ends here." The sound of the door slamming echoed like thunder, final and absolute. Emily sat on the living room floor surrounded by silence, the walls echoing with memories that no longer belonged to her. A pile of photographs lay scattered across the carpet, each one a reminder of love turned to ashes. She picked up a picture of her wedding day. James' smile frozen in time, and her hand trembled as she whispered, "That woman isn't me anymore." With a deep breath, she tore the photo in half, the sound sharp in the stillness. Her chest tightened, but she didn't stop. One by one, she ripped through the images, each tear a release. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but in the middle of destruction, something unfamiliar stirred, relief. Emily whispered, "I can start again," her voice breaking but determined. The next morning, Emily sat at the kitchen table with Sarah. A soft stream of daylight filled the room, carrying the smell of fresh coffee. Sarah reached across, holding Emily's hand. "You're stronger than you think," she said gently. Emily's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her voice carried more steadiness than before. "It feels like everything's gone, Sarah. Like I'm standing in ruins." Sarah squeezed her hand and whispered, "Ruins can become the foundation for something new." Emily let out a shaky laugh, the first sound resembling hope in days. She whispered, "Maybe I can still rebuild." For the first time, her words didn't feel empty. They felt like the fragile beginning of a new truth. Emily walked along a quiet park path in the afternoon, the air cool and crisp after rain. Children's laughter echoed from the distance, reminding her of innocence untouched. She clutched her jacket tighter, her heart heavy yet slowly steadying. She whispered, "I'm still here." Birds rustled in the trees above, and sunlight broke through clouds, scattering golden beams across the grass. She paused, tilting her head toward the light, letting it warm her face. For a brief moment, the weight in her chest lifted. Emily thought of her children and the life ahead. Pain still lived in her, but it no longer suffocated her. She whispered again, stronger this time, "I'm still here." That evening, Emily sat on the porch swing, her children playing in the yard. Their laughter floated through the air like a fragile melody. She smiled faintly, though her eyes still carried shadows. She whispered, "They deserve better than broken pieces of me." She pulled a blanket tighter around her shoulders, watching the sun sink behind the trees. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by betrayal. It was terrifying, but it was hers to create. Her son ran up, tugging at her arm. "Mom, come play." She looked down at his eager face and nodded, her heart softening. "Okay," she whispered, standing slowly. In that moment, the weight of her choice felt lighter. Later that night, Emily stood at her bedroom window, gazing at the stars through the clear sky. Her reflection stared back faintly in the glass, no longer as fragile as before. She whispered, "You can't break me anymore." The night air slipped through the cracked window, cool and refreshing. She thought of the pain still lingering inside, but also of the strength that had begun to bloom. Betrayal had scarred her, but it had not ended her. She pressed her fingertips to the glass, grounding herself in the present. "Tomorrow," she whispered softly, "I'll take the next step." Her voice carried both exhaustion and resolve, a fragile vow to herself that she was no longer trapped in the ruins of the past. Emily sat at her desk late at night, a single lamp casting a pale circle of light across scattered papers. The silence pressed heavily against her, broken only by the ticking clock on the wall. She whispered, "It's quiet, but it doesn't feel like peace." Her phone lay nearby, the screen dark, untouched for hours. She had tried calling Sarah earlier but hadn't left a message. The loneliness gnawed at her, reminding her that betrayal had left not just scars but emptiness. She pressed her hands together, resting her forehead against them. Her voice cracked as she said, "I thought I could survive this, but it still hurts like hell." The stillness of the room answered her back, cold and merciless. The phone buzzed suddenly, startling her. Emily's heart leapt, hope flickering for an instant. She snatched it up, only to see James's name glowing on the screen. Her face twisted in disgust as she whispered, "Not you, not anymore." She let the phone ring out, the vibration echoing like a cruel taunt in the still night. She set it down face first, as though burying it from sight. Emily muttered, "You don't get to take more from me." Her voice trembled but carried conviction. She sat back, her body sinking into the chair, exhaustion weighing heavily on her frame. Outside the window, the night seemed endless, stars faintly visible, as though mocking her search for light. Emily rose and walked to the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water. The sound of it filling echoed in the silence, strangely loud. She stared at her reflection in the glass, eyes hollow but still burning with life. She whispered, "I'm not the same woman anymore." The betrayal had carved her down to her bones, but somewhere beneath the wreckage, resilience pulsed faintly. She leaned against the counter, her shoulders slumped. "I'll carry these scars forever," she said softly, "but they won't own me." The glass trembled in her hand, water rippling with each shaky breath. For a moment, she let herself believe survival was possible, even if healing would take a lifetime. Emily returned to the living room and picked up the phone once more. This time, she scrolled to Sarah's number, her thumb hovering above the call button. She hesitated, her breath catching. "I just need one person to answer," she whispered. She pressed the button, holding the phone to her ear, praying for comfort. The line rang and rang, each tone amplifying the hollow ache inside her chest. Finally, it clicked to voicemail. Emily's lips parted, but no words came. Her throat tightened until she could barely breathe. She hung up, dropping the phone onto the couch beside her, the silence now unbearable. "Even she's gone," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. Emily sat in the silence, staring into the dark room as the weight of truth pressed down on her. She whispered, "I've been alone all along." The words echoed softly, as if the walls themselves carried them back to her. She leaned forward, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Yet within her tears, there was no collapse, only a haunting acceptance. Betrayal had torn her apart, but it had also stripped away illusions she once clung to. The silence became her final answer, a mirror of her solitude. Emily lifted her head, eyes glistening, and whispered, "But I'm still here." Her voice was fragile yet unbroken, the last spark in a storm of shadows.